Hey everybody, Cara with Bluebird Homestead. I've been under the weather the last few days, so thank you to everybody who has sent me well wishes. I really appreciate that. I'm feeling much better now. Just because I was under the weather does not mean I stopped cooking. I prepared quite a few different things. I recently made some Cucamelon Pickles, which was a couple-day process, so I wanted to share that with you guys, as well as a few other recipes that I made.
One thing I love using the Instant Pot for is making soups and beans. You can cook dried beans in the Instant Pot and it takes under an hour versus having them soak all night for a recipe. I plan on making some soup today, so I'm going to go ahead and cook up the beans with a bay leaf, some better than bouillon vegetable base, and this is some homemade chicken stock from the other day. I'm going to put all that into here, add some water, and then cook it for about 45 minutes on high before adding the rest of my soup ingredients. One bay leaf. This is my chicken stock, bone broth kind of situation from the other day. Then I have some better than bouillon vegetable base that I'm going to add to this as well. I'm just going to add maybe about a tablespoon. Stir it all together. And then I'm going to add some water to this as well. I went ahead and filled this up about halfway because it'll also flavor the water that I'm going to be using for the soup anyway. Lid on, turn it to sealing. We're just going to pressure cook these for 30 to 45 minutes. I'm just going to go ahead and go on the higher side of things just to make sure that the beans aren't crunchy at all. Now, I will be turning the pressure cooker on again after I add the rest of my soup ingredients. So 45 minutes might be a little overkill, but that's what we're going to do.
I have a couple cloves of garlic that I'm going to add to our beans. The beans are done now. You can see they have puffed up quite a bit. It's kind of hard to squeeze this garlic with one hand and hold the camera at the same time. That's a great idea.
What is that?
He wants to clean up all of his toys before church.
Yes.
I don't know if you could hear that in the background, but our eldest son actually wanted to pick up his toys before church, so yay for that. I have an onion here that had started to sprout in the basement that I'm just going to chop up and add to the soup as well. I'm saving the onion tops because they taste basically like a scallion, and we'll use those for our soup too. No sense in throwing them away. They're perfectly edible. I'm using 2 small onions. Now, if you had 1 larger onion, that would do the same trick. However, these ones were just a little bit on the smaller size. That's why I'm using 2. The center of this onion is actually going bad a little bit. Like I said, these were sprouting. So I just pulled that out and put it into the compost. But the rest of the onion's still good. I have a few other onions in the basement that are starting to sprout that I want to put up and preserve in different ways. But that'll be a project for next week. The other night for dinner, we roasted up a whole chicken with just some olive oil and a few different seasonings, and the leftovers from that, I'm just going to dice up into chunks to add to the soup. One of the questions we get a lot is if we get bored of eating mainly chicken, because for those of you who don't know, we raised a whole deep freezer full of meat birds last spring, and no, we honestly don't. I think one of the tricks to keeping it interesting and not getting bored with it is using the chicken in non-conventional ways, such as the soup, for instance. I'm adding 1 block of cream cheese to the soup. I'm just going to try to scrape any goodness off the wrapper that I can, and just a splash of lime juice, as well as a few peppers from the garden. These are cayenne peppers. I also believe one of these might be a corbaci pepper, which is kind of like a sweet bell pepper. So a little bit of kick, but not too much. I'm also going to add about a tablespoon of cumin and about a tablespoon of the Better Than Bouillon chicken base. And then we're just going to pressure cook it on high for 3 minutes just to get everything melted and warmed through. It's a chilly day today, so the soup is going to hit the spot. I did forget to add Italian seasoning. I added about 1 to 2 tablespoons here of that. And then I just like to sprinkle a little bit of feta cheese on the top. And that's our dinner. Let's harvest these cucamelons to make some pickles. I am following a sweet gherkin pickle recipe that's on page 336 of the Ball Canning Cookbook. The first thing I did was make a little spice packet here with a piece of cheesecloth. I have some celery seed, whole cinnamon stick, allspice, cloves, bay leaf, coriander seed, black peppercorns, ginger, dill, and cardamom, and a little bit of hot pepper flakes. It's been 24 hours already since I've started this process. I first just took some pickling salt and water, brought it to a boil, and let the cucamelon sit in that solution for 12 hours, and then I repeated the process for another 12 hours. Then I went through and just poked each of the cucamelons with this corn cob holder, and I found that it actually was kind of the perfect size just to do this project. Then after that, we took sugar and some vinegar with our spice bag, brought it to a boil, poured that mixture over top of the cucamelons, and then I used a plate and a Cool Whip container full of water to weigh it down, covered it, and let it sit for 12 hours, and then I repeated that process 2 more times for a total of 3 times before moving on to canning. Once the cucamelons are finished, they have a nice shine to them. I actually really enjoy these. I'm typically not a pickle person, but the sweetness of these are really kind of just like candy. They're actually pretty good. So I'm sure if you're a pickle person, you would like them even more. These cucamelon pickles were a fun way to use up these cucamelons. They're basically like a mini cucumber, so pickling them was a great option. And I just water bath canned these for 10 minutes.
I'm going to be showing you how to turn bread into the shape of a pumpkin. It's really pretty simple to do. It's a fun addition to add to any fall dinner, but also especially for Thanksgiving coming up as well. So let me show you how we do it. The first ingredient we need is 2 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. You can use rapid or active drying yeast, but if you use active, like I am, instead of the instant, it will take just a little bit longer to proof. So we need 2 1/4. Then we need 1 teaspoon of sugar or honey. The sugar helps to activate the yeast and to get it working a little quicker. Then 1 1/4 cup of warm water. Then you just want to stir it just a little bit. We're going to wait about 10 to 15 minutes until this yeast is starting to bubble and looks active. I'm going to show you how to turn bread into a pumpkin shape with the active yeast and also with a sourdough starter. I have my sourdough starter here. I just pulled it out of the fridge this morning, so I need to feed it. But as you can see, the bowl is pretty full, so we need to use up some of this sourdough discard. One of our favorite things to make with sourdough discard is crackers. It's really easy and it's only a couple ingredients. While we're waiting on our yeast to bubble, let me show you how we do the sourdough crackers. I want to encourage you that you don't always have to measure your ingredients. Hopefully this video will be helpful for you so you can see what the consistency of these sourdough crackers should look like before you bake them, because you don't have to measure it and get it absolutely perfect. We're going to start with 1 cup of regular all-purpose flour, and then 1 cup of the sourdough discard. And it could be a generous cup. Now I do a lot of my baking just by feel and kind of by the looks of things. So I encourage you to branch out from just normal recipes and try that too. And then you're gonna add about a tablespoon of coconut oil. There's no need to melt the coconut oil because we're gonna be mixing this together pretty thoroughly. Then you wanna just add whatever seasoning mix that you wanna do. You can really have fun with this and do whatever seasoning you want. Our favorite cracker seasoning of the moment is this everything bagel seasoning. I add about a tablespoon of this. Now, this particular seasoning already has salt in it, so I don't add any additional salt. However, if you're gonna do parsley or oregano or Italian seasoning or something that doesn't have salt mixed into it already, you wanna add additional salt as well.
Now, we really like this, so we do about a tablespoon of this seasoning.
And then you just want to stir everything together really well. And since we didn't melt the coconut oil, you want to make sure you just mix it up enough so that there's no chunks of it. I put one of these silicone sheets on my cookie tray, but you could also just use parchment paper if you have that. Your sourdough cracker mix should basically look like a really thick dough. And we're just going to roll it out as thin as you'd like it. The crackers are really good if you do it thick or thinner. I personally like them a little on the thinner side. They have more of like a melt in your mouth kind of buttery taste if you do them really thin. If you do them thicker, then they're a little more on the side of like bread. So bake them both ways and see what you like personally. Now, if you do make them thicker, they will have to bake a little longer. I bake them at about 325, 350 degrees for 10 to 30 minutes. And after about the 10-minute mark, you want to come in and score them to make uniform crackers, or you could just completely ignore scoring them and break apart the crackers when it's all out of the oven. It'll just have more of a rustic look if you break them after they're all baked versus scoring them halfway through.
This is what your sourdough cracker dough should look like. Kind of pillowy and soft. I just kneaded it for a few seconds with my hands. So let's roll this out.
I like to use my fingers to spread it out before I get the rolling pin.
You can also add a little bit of butter or melted coconut oil to the top and then sprinkle a few more seasonings on it. I'm just going to take a little bit of this coconut oil. I'm just going to take a little bit of coconut oil with my fingers, still in the solid state, and just kind of rub it over the top. You could also melt it and use a brush. I just have a thin layer of the coconut oil all over the top, and then taking a little bit more of my seasoning, I'll sprinkle that over. Another variation we also like to do is some Parmesan cheese or cheddar cheese over the top. That makes for a really yummy cracker too. So we're gonna bake this in the oven at 325 for approximately 30 minutes, checking periodically as we go. And I'll show you what they look like when they're done.
Now that the sourdough crackers are in the oven, I have room to feed my sourdough discard. So I will feed this, and then later this evening I'll show you guys how I make sourdough bread to look like a pumpkin. Coming back over to our yeast pumpkin loaf now. We're gonna add approximately 3 cups of flour to our yeast mixture now. It's just starting to foam, and 1 teaspoon of salt. We're gonna do approximately 3 cups of flour, but adding it 1 cup at a time until it's fully incorporated. After the 2 cups of flour is when you want to go ahead and add your salt. We're doing 1 teaspoon of salt. I kneaded the dough just until it started to come together into a loaf. It'll take approximately 2.5 to 3 cups of flour. You just kind of want to eyeball it until it starts to come together, and then knead it for just a few more minutes until you can form a little ball.
I covered it with a kitchen towel and we're gonna let it rest for 1 hour.
It's been 10 minutes now, so we're going to score our crackers. I'm just using a pizza cutter, but again, like I mentioned, this step is completely optional. I put them back in and I let them bake for about another 20 minutes, and they are ready to come out of the oven now.
Our sourdough crackers have come out of the oven now. They have had a chance to cool for just a minute, and I'm going to show you kind of the texture that they should be. They should have a slight golden color on the underside and just ever so slightly starting to turn colors on the top. I went ahead and pre-scored these. You can see there's some layers in the texture of the cracker, and when they're completely cooled, when you break them, they'll have a nice snap. And you can see they have some nice flaky buttery layers. If you want them to be a softer cracker rather than have the crisp, just bake them for a few minutes less and it'll be kind of like a flatbread. When they first come out of the oven, they won't have that crispy texture as much until they cool. So just be cognitive of that.
And you just want to store your crackers in an airtight container. However, these probably won't even last the rest of the day. These are a yummy snack that everybody in the house really likes.
Our bread has been proofing for an hour. Our bread has about doubled in size. I have just put a Dutch oven into the oven to preheat. You want a Dutch oven or some other pot with a lid for cooking this bread. I have a round bowl to shape this bread. First thing we're gonna do is just line it with a kitchen towel. This is just a thinner, lightweight kitchen towel. It doesn't have any texture. Now, if you use something that has texture, like the one I had covering the bowl, just be aware that it may make those indentations on your bread. So you might transfer over that pattern, which sometimes can be kind of pretty. We put the towel lining the bowl, then we're just gonna sprinkle some flour all over the towel and be kind of generous with it here. Then just take the dough out of your bowl. Be careful not to punch it down because you want it to maintain its shape. And I'm kind of just gonna pinch it back on itself a little bit to form it into a round sphere again. The seam on the underside, I kind of just pinch it to close that seam up. And I just like to go on the counter and kind of go like this to shape it. Just a little bit more. And if you kind of give it a little wiggle on the counter, it'll help kind of close in that seam. Then I want to put it seam side up into my flour dusted bowl. Then we have it covered up and we're just gonna let it rise for another 30 minutes while our pot is preheating in the oven. And we're having the pot preheat at 450 degrees Fahrenheit in the oven. It's been 30 minutes now since we put our bread into our bowl. It's puffed up a little bit and risen slightly. So we are going to move on to the next step. You could bake your bread in this shape and you would get a nice artisan round loaf, but we are now going to be turning it into the pumpkin shape. Now, what you need for that is some twine. So you're gonna take some kitchen twine and you wanna cut 3 strands. I have them about 3 feet long. This is probably a little overkill, but I wanted to give myself plenty of wiggle room because you're gonna want to be able to completely wrap around the bread and tie a knot at the top. I'll show you here. Before we pop the bread out of our bowl, you just wanna sprinkle a generous dusting of flour all over the top. Then what you're gonna do is find about the middle point of your string that you've cut and lay that over the top of the bowl. This is how we make our pumpkin shape. Then you're gonna take the second piece and lay it over in a crisscross. And the third piece crossing over again so that you have 6 even triangles around the top of your bowl. Then I have a little piece of parchment paper here that I cut in the approximate shape of the bowl with some handles on the side so that it'll be easy to lift it out of the Dutch oven in a minute. And what you want to do is flip all of this over. Now this will make a little bit of a mess because you do have flour all over this towel, but you want to lift up your bowl and then Gently lift up the towel and adjust your strings. Then you're going to bring your strings up to meet in the center and tie them. Once you have them lined up, you want to tie them just a little bit tighter so that it starts to make that pumpkin shape. And as the bread bakes, it will tighten up the pumpkin shape even more. And then with your extra twine at the top, I am just going to tie it one more time and then cut off the excess. Then you kind of want to dust off the excess flour. Then taking a sharp knife, you can make a scored pattern on your pumpkin loaf as well if you'd like. I'm just going to do some little slits here. Now you want to put it directly into your hot cast iron, only taking the lid off for just a second to plop it in and put the lid right back on to capture the steam. We are going to bake this bread for 30 minutes at 450 degrees. Then we'll remove the lid and bake for another 10 minutes just until it's nice and golden brown.
I let the bread cool for a few minutes, and now I just need to cut off all the twine.
Now to make our bread look more like pumpkin, it needs a stem. I'm just using a little piece of a whole cinnamon stick, and I'm just gonna stick it right in the middle.
And now I'm going to go ahead and make a sourdough loaf version as well. The sourdough recipe that I'm using, you make in the evening, and then you let it sit overnight, and then you bake it in the morning. Now I have enough here for 2 loaves, so I'm going to do one just as a normal round loaf, and then one with a twine to make it look like a pumpkin. It's always nice to have fresh bread on hand. I think next time I try out this pumpkin-shaped sourdough loaf, I may do a double batch so that hopefully it'll get a little more rise to it, more of a soccer ball shape, instead of splitting it up into 2 loaves.
This one got a little bit crispy on me. I was outside playing in the sandbox with the kids and I didn't hear the timer going off.
I know you're supposed to wait until your bread cools before you slice it, but I'm impatient. And I think there's nothing better than some warm bread with a little bit of butter and honey as a snack.
I hope you guys enjoyed all those recipes. I have links in my description box below to all the different gadgets and cooking supplies that I use on a regular basis. The links are Amazon affiliate links, which basically means if you use them, I do earn a small commission. However, it does not change the price to what it normally is on Amazon. Anyway, so there's no extra cost to you. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day wherever you're at. Bye, y'all.